My beloved child, stop for a moment, because the confession coming toward you is not the confession you think it is. Someone connected to your heart has been carrying a truth they have struggled to say out loud, and the moment they finally reveal it, you may understand why their behavior has felt so different lately. Yes, the word married is connected to this story, but that is only the first layer. There is another secret beneath it. Something far more personal, something they have protected because they were afraid of what would happen if you knew. Stay with me for a moment, because the next part may completely change the way you see their silence. They have rehearsed this conversation in their mind more times than you realize. They have imagined your reaction, your questions, even the moment when you simply look at them and say nothing. And there is one sentence they have wanted to tell you for a very long time, but every time they came close, their courage disappeared. This may resonate as we continue, because sometimes the biggest truth is hidden behind the smallest changes, a message left unsent, a conversation suddenly ending, a name appearing on their screen, or a person becoming unusually quiet when your connection is mentioned. Something huge is waiting for you, but it begins with understanding this. The confession is not simply about their relationship status. It is about why they allowed you to believe one version of their story while privately carrying another. Now listen carefully, because this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Your soulmate may finally admit that they are married, but the shocking revelation is that their marriage does not explain why they kept thinking about you. In fact, it may explain the opposite. There is something unfinished in their heart that they have never been able to organize into words. They may tell you that they tried to convince themselves that time would erase the feeling, that distance would make everything easier, and that choosing a different path would eventually silence the questions inside them. But it did not. Every time life became quiet, your memory returned. Every time they reached an important moment, a strange thought appeared. What if I had been honest with them? That question became heavier with time. And now, they are reaching a point where pretending everything is simple has become harder than telling the truth. But here is the part you were not expecting: they are not preparing to confess simply because they want sympathy. They are preparing because there is another piece of information connected to their marriage that changes the entire meaning of what happened between you. Perhaps they entered that commitment while carrying uncertainty. Perhaps circumstances moved faster than their heart could understand. Perhaps someone else made a decision that affected their future before they had the courage to make their own. Whatever the hidden reason, one thing becomes clear: their silence was not empty. Their silence was carrying a story. And then comes the moment they have feared the most. Imagine them finally looking at you, taking a breath, and saying, "There is something I never told you." Those words may sound simple, but behind them is an entire chapter they have kept closed. They may explain why they disappeared at certain moments, why they became distant after becoming emotionally close, why they sometimes seemed ready to come toward you and then suddenly stepped back. They may even admit that there were moments when they wanted to contact you but stopped themselves because they believed they had already lost the right to disturb your life. But the biggest secret may be this: they never truly stopped wondering whether you were the person they should have chosen. That realization has followed them through ordinary days, celebrations, quiet evenings, and moments when everyone around them believed they were completely fine. And now they may finally reveal what they have been protecting, not necessarily a dramatic event, but an emotional truth that changes the meaning of everything you experience together. They may tell you that you were never forgotten. They may admit that a part of their heart remained attached to the version of life where they were honest with you from the beginning. Stay with me, because the next revelation is where the emotional weight becomes impossible to ignore. The secret is not merely that they are married. The secret is why, despite everything that happened afterward, they still feel that one conversation with you is unfinished. Something huge is waiting for you, and before this story reaches its most important moment, understand one final thing: a confession does not always arrive with dramatic words. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet message at an unexpected hour. Sometimes it begins with, "Can we talk?" Sometimes it comes after months of silence, when the person who once seemed impossible to reach suddenly becomes honest. And when that moment comes, the truth may not be exactly what you imagined. They may tell you that their life looks complete from the outside, but inside they have been questioning decisions they once believed were permanent. They may finally acknowledge that they should have been honest with you much earlier. They may admit that their marriage is only the visible part of the story, while the deeper secret is the emotional decision they never made. And that is why this confession matters. Because the biggest revelation is not simply, "I am married." It is the sentence that may come after it, "But there is something about you I never managed to let go of." Stay with me as this unfolds, because clarity will come. The truth they have been carrying is finally moving toward the light, and when the final piece falls into place, you may understand that the silence between you was never as simple as it appeared. There is one detail they have been hiding behind every excuse, every delayed message, and every moment of hesitation, and now, that detail is beginning to surface. My beloved child, you may have thought the biggest revelation would be hearing that they are married, but that was only the doorway. The real confession begins with the reason they never told you sooner. They were afraid that once you knew the complete truth, you would look at every memory between you differently. They remember the conversations you had, the moments when neither of you needed many words, and the strange feeling that something between you was never completely finished. They may admit that they tried to place those memories into the past, but every attempt only made them realize how deeply those moments affected them. Stay with me for a moment, because there is another layer coming. At some point, they may tell you that they almost contacted you several times, but each time they stopped because they did not know what they could honestly say. "I miss you" felt incomplete. "I made a mistake" felt too simple. And "I never stopped caring" was the sentence they were most afraid to send. So instead, they remained silent. But silence did not erase the truth. It only gave it more time to grow. Now imagine the conversation becoming more personal. They finally stop explaining what happened around them and begin explaining what happened inside them. They may tell you that their marriage brought responsibilities, expectations, and an entirely different direction in life, but somewhere underneath all of that was a question they never answered. Why did your connection continue to matter? Why did your name still carry a different emotional weight? Why did certain memories return even after they had convinced themselves that everything was settled? This is where the confession becomes unexpectedly powerful. They may reveal that they once believed choosing a different path meant they had automatically closed the chapter with you. But time taught them something different. Closing a chapter and forgetting the story are not the same thing. And perhaps the biggest surprise is that they have recently realized this more strongly than ever. Something happened, maybe a conversation, a meaningful reminder, or simply a quiet moment when they were forced to reflect, and suddenly the truth became impossible to ignore. They understood that they could continue pretending, but they could no longer pretend they did not know how they truly felt. As this unfolds, clarity will come. The confession is moving closer, and what they reveal next may explain the strange distance you have felt from them. If this story is resonating with you, take a second to share this video with someone who may need to hear these words, and leave a comment with the part of the story that feels most familiar to you. Your experience may be the very reason someone else stays long enough to hear what they needed today. Now come back with me, because the most important piece has not been revealed yet. They may confess that they have spent a long time comparing the life they have with the life they once imagined. Not because everything around them is necessarily what you think, but because they finally recognized something about themselves. They were making decisions based on what seemed expected, practical, or easier to explain, while their heart continued asking a completely different question. And this is where the word "married" becomes only a small part of the story. The deeper secret may be that they never gave themselves permission to be completely honest about what they wanted. They may have convinced everyone, including themselves, that they were certain. But privately, uncertainty remained. And when they think about you, that uncertainty becomes impossible to ignore. There may even be one specific memory they keep returning to, a moment that seemed ordinary at the time but now feels incredibly important to them. They remember what you said, how you looked at them, or simply how safe and understood they felt around you. That memory became a quiet reminder of something they had pushed aside. And now we reach the point where everything begins connecting. Something huge is waiting for you, because the confession may not end with an explanation, it may end with a question. They may finally ask whether you ever felt the same way. They may want to know whether the connection meant as much to you as it did to them. They may be searching your face for an answer before you even speak, because deep down, they have carried one final fear, that they waited too long. That you moved forward. That the person they once knew has changed. That the door they were too afraid to approach may no longer be open. And perhaps that is the real secret behind their hesitation. They were not only hiding their truth from you, they were protecting themselves from hearing yours. Stay with me, because there is still another revelation waiting beneath this confession. When they finally explain why they stayed silent, you may discover that the story was never about a lack of feeling. It was about fear, timing, choices, and a truth that became stronger the longer they tried to ignore it. The next words they say could finally explain why, after all this time, they still feel that your story has one unfinished conversation. There is a reason their confession has taken so long to reach you, and it begins with something they have never been able to explain properly. My beloved child, after hearing them admit that they are married, you might expect the story to end there. But instead, they may look at you and reveal that their biggest secret has nothing to do with a title, a ceremony, or what people see from the outside. It is about a choice they made while their heart was still carrying unanswered questions. For a long time, they told themselves that moving forward meant leaving everything behind. They tried to become comfortable with the life they had chosen, tried to stop revisiting old memories, and tried to convince themselves that certain feelings were simply part of the past. But something kept happening. Whenever life became quiet, the thoughts returned. A familiar song, a certain place, an unexpected reminder, or even a simple question from someone else could bring your memory back instantly. And instead of disappearing, that memory seemed to become clearer. Stay with me for a moment, because the next part reveals why their silence may have been much more complicated than you ever imagined. They were not necessarily hiding because they did not care. They were hiding because they did not know what honesty would change. Then comes the revelation that could make you rethink every moment when they seemed distant. They may confess that there were times when they wanted to tell you everything, but they kept asking themselves one question. What would happen if I opened that door again? They knew that once the truth was spoken, they could not simply take it back. So they chose silence. They watched from a distance. They wondered about your life. They imagined what you might say if they suddenly appeared and explained everything. And somewhere along the way, they realized something that surprised even them: the feelings they had tried to bury had never completely disappeared. But here is where the story becomes even more emotional. They may tell you that their biggest regret was not necessarily choosing another path, it was failing to be completely honest with you before that path became permanent. They may admit that you deserved clarity much earlier. You deserved to know what was happening inside their heart instead of being left to interpret silence on your own. As this unfolds, clarity will come, because sometimes the truth arrives late not because it is weak, but because the person carrying it needed years to understand what it meant. And now they are finally beginning to understand. There is also a hidden reason they may have recently become more restless, more reflective, or unusually emotional when your name comes into the conversation. Something has shifted inside them. Perhaps they realized that time does not automatically answer every question. Perhaps they reached a personal milestone and suddenly wondered who they would have been if they had made different choices. Perhaps they looked at their life and realized that one chapter had never received the honest ending it deserved. Whatever triggered it, the result is the same: they can no longer keep pretending that your connection meant nothing. If you are still watching, share this with someone who believes that some conversations deserve a second chance, and tell us in the comments which part of this story touched you most. And then listen closely, because the next revelation is the one they may have been most afraid to admit. They may confess that while everyone assumed they had moved on, there was one part of their heart that continued comparing every important emotional moment with the way they once felt around you. Not because they wanted to live in the past, but because you represented something they never fully understood until much later. You represented a version of themselves that felt honest, open, and unguarded. That realization may have taken them years. And once they understood it, their silence became harder to maintain. But the biggest secret is still waiting behind all of this. Imagine the moment they finally stop speaking in circles and tell you exactly what they have been carrying. They may say that the marriage is real, but the story they allowed people to believe about their heart was never complete. They may admit that there is an emotional chapter they never truly closed, and that chapter has your name attached to it. They may tell you that they have wondered whether you would ever understand why they disappeared, why they hesitated, and why they chose silence when honesty might have changed everything. And then comes the sentence that could leave you completely still. They may finally admit that they did not tell you because they were afraid you would stop seeing them the way you once did. That fear explains more than any excuse could. They were afraid of losing even the memory of what existed between you. They were afraid that telling you the truth would destroy the last connection they still carried privately. Something huge is waiting for you, but remember this: the most powerful part of a confession is not always what someone reveals about themselves. Sometimes it is what their confession reveals about the years of silence that came before it. And when their final piece of truth comes forward, you may finally understand why they have never been able to call your story completely finished.